The northern wilderness of Canada stretches beyond imagination. Between the tree lines of Ontario and the frozen coasts of Manitoba lies a world where silence reigns and survival depends on respect for the land. It is a place of endless tundra, of blackwater rivers and biting winds, where a person can vanish as easily as a footprint in snow. This is where Stefan Spjodovik chose to test himself. He was 29 years old, born in Norway, and raised with a love for open spaces and harsh weather. For as long as he could remember, Stefan had been drawn to solitude. While others sought comfort and company, he found peace in silence. His life revolved around the outdoors, hiking, paddling, filming, and writing about his journeys into the wild. Through his videos and journals, he shared not danger or conquest, but calm, the steady rhythm of water, the glow of a campfire, the feeling of being small before something vast and alive. By the summer of 2022, Stefan had already completed several solo expeditions across Scandinavia. He had crossed frozen fjords, navigated mountain passes, and endured Arctic storms. Yet one challenge remained: the great wilderness of northern Canada, a place that had captured his imagination for years. He wanted to trace a historical route once used by fur traders and indigenous travelers, from Fort Severn, Ontario, to York Factory, Manitoba. It was a journey of more than 700 miles, through terrain few people ever set foot upon. To Stefan, this was not a stunt. It was a pilgrimage. He spent months studying maps, weather patterns, and river conditions. He arranged his supplies with the precision of a soldier: dehydrated meals, waterproof gear, a lightweight canoe, navigation tools, and emergency equipment. 2 loyal dogs would travel with him, companions who had followed him across ice and forest before. Together, they would face the same isolation, the same hunger, the same beauty. The plan was simple in theory but brutal in practice. The journey would take about 3 weeks. He would travel west along the Severn River system, crossing countless lakes and portages, then follow the Hayes River down to Hudson Bay. Along the way, he would send short updates through a satellite communicator, small messages, just enough to confirm he was alive and moving. His last message came on July 25th. It was brief, calm, and confident. Everything was fine. He would soon reach the Hayes River. Spirits were high. Then silence. No further messages came through. Days passed, then weeks. When he failed to reach York Factory by his expected date, concern grew. It wasn't unusual for weather or technical issues to delay communication, but those who knew him felt a quiet unease. Stefan was disciplined. He had trained for years to avoid mistakes. What happened between that final message and his disappearance remains one of the great mysteries of the modern wilderness. The area he entered is among the most remote regions in North America. There are no roads, no settlements, and no easy means of rescue. Once you leave Fort Severn, you are truly alone. Rivers change without warning. Winds shift. Storms rise from nothing. The same rivers that carried traders centuries ago have taken countless lives since. And yet, Stefan believed he could manage it. He trusted his experience, his instincts, his discipline. He had faith in his dogs and his preparations. To him, fear was not something to avoid. It was something to respect, a quiet reminder that the wilderness always had the final word. In the days before his departure, he wrote a note in his journal: "If I make it to York Factory, I'll finally understand this land. If I don't, I'll still have been where few have ever gone." On a gray northern morning, he loaded his canoe, checked the straps on his packs, and turned one last time toward the small settlement of Fort Severn. Then he pushed into the current and began to paddle north. No one would ever see him again. When Stefan left Fort Severn, the air was cool and still. The last human sounds faded quickly behind him. The distant hum of a generator, a dog barking somewhere among the houses, the low murmur of the river against the bank. Within an hour, all that remained was the steady rhythm of his paddle and the breathing of his dogs. The Severn River flowed north through a landscape that seemed endless. On either side stretched low forest and muskeg, a mixture of black spruce, tamarack, and moss-covered ground that swallowed footprints. The land was flat, the horizon a thin gray line that barely seemed to move no matter how long he paddled. This was not a place of landmarks or trails. It was a maze of water and swamp where every direction looked the same. Stefan's training served him well. He rose early, breaking camp at dawn, and paddled for hours before the heat of midday. His journal notes from those first days showed quiet optimism. He wrote about calm waters, about how the dogs had settled quickly into their rhythm, about the light that lingered late into the evening. "It feels like being inside time itself," he wrote on the third day. "Everything moves slowly, and nothing seems to change." The dogs, Luna and Togo, were more than companions. They were his guardians in the wild. They rowed the canoe with practiced balance, their eyes fixed on the shoreline, alert to the movements of birds or distant shapes among the trees. At night, they slept close to him, forming a circle of warmth against the northern chill. He spoke to them often, not because he needed to, but because in that vast silence, the sound of his own voice anchored him to something human. Food and routine gave shape to his days. Each evening he would drag the canoe onto a patch of higher ground, tie the dogs, and collect wood for a small fire. He ate modestly. Oatmeal in the morning, dried meat and nuts during the day, a simple meal of rice or soup at night. Everything had to be measured carefully. In the wilderness, waste was as dangerous as hunger. By the end of the first week, he had covered good distance. The upper Severn was broad and calm, and the weather had remained steady. His satellite messages during that period were short but reassuring. "All good here," one read. "Dog strong. Moving west tomorrow." Then, the weather changed. Rain came without warning. A cold, relentless drizzle that blurred the horizon and soaked through his clothes. The river grew faster, swirling with brown water from the bogs upstream. Each stroke of the paddle became heavier, each movement slower. The wind pressed against him, pushing the canoe sideways, forcing him to fight for every yard. For 2 days, he made little progress. He wrote in his journal that the world had turned to water, the sky, the river, even the ground beneath his tent. Everything was wet. He spoke of fatigue, of sore muscles, but also of wonder. "I've never seen so much space," he wrote. "There is no noise here, no direction, only motion. It feels like the earth is breathing." When the storm passed, the mosquitoes arrived in clouds so thick that breathing felt difficult. He covered his face with netting, worked quickly to pack his gear, and pressed on. Each mile now carried him farther from the known world, into the heart of the Hudson Bay lowlands, a region so isolated that even rescue aircraft struggled to navigate it. He saw life all around him, moose feeding in the shallows, eagles circling overhead, a black bear crossing the opposite bank. At night, he sometimes heard wolves calling from far away. The dogs would lift their heads, listening, but they did not bark. Out here, noise was a kind of respect. By the 10th day, he reached the first of several major portages. These were the hardest parts of the route, sections where the river narrowed into rapids or vanished into swamp, forcing him to carry the canoe and all his gear overland. He moved slowly, taking multiple trips across uneven, spongy ground. The weight of his supplies cut into his shoulders, and each step sank into the mud. He later described one portage as a battle against the earth itself. Still, he endured. Every hardship seemed to reaffirm his purpose. The wilderness was not his enemy, it was his test. He wrote, "If I can keep moving, the land will let me pass." That night he made camp beside a lake whose name was not on any map he carried. The surface was smooth as glass, the reflection of the moon bright enough to read by. He fed Luna and Togo, dried his boots by the fire, and wrote a few lines before sleeping, heading toward the Hayes River. Spirits good, feeling small, but alive. It would be one of his last clear journal entries. Beyond that lake lay the borderlands of Manitoba, where the terrain flattened into open tundra and the rivers gathered strength. The haze awaited him there, a vast, fast-moving artery of cold northern water. He knew the crossing would be dangerous, but he trusted his skill. He had read the river's history, studied its maps, and rehearsed every movement in his mind. The wilderness ahead would not care about his preparation. It would test it in ways no human could foresee. And somewhere beyond that silent horizon, fate was already waiting. By the 12th day, Stefan had reached the outer edges of Ontario. The Severn's winding path had carried him through countless small lakes and shallow streams. But ahead lay the next stage of his journey, the descent into Manitoba and toward the Hayes River. The landscape changed as he moved west. The forest thinned, the air grew colder, and the ground under his boots felt less like soil and more like a soaked sponge that refused to hold his weight. Everything smelled of water and moss. His progress slowed. The land here was no longer kind to travelers. There were fewer solid banks for landing, fewer places to pitch a tent. Often, he had to sleep on small patches of raised rock or drag the canoe onto damp muskeg that shivered under his weight. The dogs were restless at night, waking to distant noises, though Stefan could never tell if they came from animals or from the shifting of the land itself. Still, he pressed on. The weather was unpredictable. Hours of cold rain followed by bursts of sunlight that turned the rivers into mirrors. He paddled through long, empty corridors of water where the sky seemed to touch the surface. His satellite messages during this period were shorter than before, simple words like "all good" or "wind strong today." They were reassuring, but to those who would later read them, they would feel like echoes from a vanishing voice. By July 23rd, he had reached the upper reaches of the Hayes watershed. The Hayes is not a river one meets lightly. For centuries, it has been both a route of trade and a graveyard of travelers. It runs more than 400 miles from the Manitoba interior to Hudson Bay, gathering speed and power as it cuts through swamps and forest. Even in summer, its water remains near freezing. Stefan had studied the Hayes extensively before his expedition. He knew the currents could shift suddenly, especially after rain. He knew that sandbanks and hidden debris made canoeing treacherous. And he knew that once he reached certain sections, turning back would be almost impossible. The Hayes would carry him forward whether he wanted it to or not. On the morning of July 24th, he reached the point where a narrow tributary joined the main flow of the river. His journal entry from that morning was brief but calm. Arrived at Hayes. Water high but clear. Dogs restless. Smell something. Will rest today and cross early tomorrow. That final line would become the most examined sentence in his notebook. The crossing he referred to was one of several dangerous sections along the upper Hayes. Here, the current accelerated sharply between low banks lined with alder and willow. The water level was higher than usual that year due to early summer rainfall. Satellite data later confirmed that the river had risen several feet in the days before Stefan arrived. To a paddler, this meant faster flow, stronger eddies, and a risk of capsizing if balance slipped even slightly. On July 25th, he sent his last known communication, heading downriver. All good. Weather clear. After that, no more messages were received. Searchers would later reconstruct his likely movements from that point. Based on his supplies, his direction, and his experience, it's believed he attempted to navigate a section known for its speed and uneven current. The dogs would have remained with him in the canoe, as they had throughout the trip. Somewhere along that stretch, something went wrong. Perhaps the canoe struck a submerged log, or a sudden whirl of water pulled it sideways. Perhaps the wind, which often shifted without warning, pushed him toward the wrong bank. There are no witnesses, no evidence beyond what was found weeks later. But what is certain is that Stefan never made it beyond that point. The Hayes River is cold even in midsummer. Water temperatures can numb the body in minutes, and the current can drag a person beneath before there's time to react. Stefan's training might have given him a chance to fight for the shore, but if he was separated from his canoe, survival would depend on luck. When he failed to make contact by the end of July, those following his journey assumed he might have lost access to his communicator or was delayed by weather. It wasn't until August 4th that the alarm was raised and authorities began coordinating a search. By then, he had been missing for more than a week. In his home country of Norway, family and friends refused to believe the worst. They described him as meticulous and cautious, someone who would never take unnecessary risks. He had crossed rivers more dangerous than the Hayes before. But the difference here was the distance from help. In this part of Manitoba, there are no roads, no villages, no cell towers, only hundreds of miles of forest and water. The Hayes had swallowed many before him. It is not a cruel river, only indifferent. Those who have paddled it describe its beauty and its violence as one and the same. The feeling of being carried by something larger than yourself, something ancient and alive. What happened to Stefan on that river remains a matter of speculation. But from that morning onward, the wilderness kept its silence. His camp remained untouched, his messages ceased, and his journey, so carefully planned, so full of purpose, vanished into the current. When Stefan failed to arrive at York Factory by his planned date, there was no immediate panic. Those who knew him best, his friends in Norway, the small online community that followed his journeys, understood that wilderness travel was unpredictable. A day or two of silence could mean a broken device, bad weather, or simply exhaustion. He had faced far worse before. But as the days passed, that silence became heavier. By August 1st, he had been overdue for nearly a week. Attempts to reach him through his satellite communicator went unanswered. His last confirmed position, sent on July 25th, placed him near the upper Hayes River. It was a remote area, unreachable by road and surrounded by endless forest, lakes, and swamp. On August 4th, the alarm was finally raised. Stefan's family contacted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Joint Rescue Coordination Center. A search operation was launched immediately, but the scale of the task was daunting. The area in question stretched for hundreds of miles with no clear indication of where he might have gone missing. The first to mobilize were members of the local First Nations communities along the river. Many of them knew the Hayes intimately. Their families had fished, hunted, and traveled its waters for generations. They understood the dangers better than anyone else. When they heard about a missing paddler and 2 dogs, they volunteered without hesitation. Boats were sent upriver from York Factory. Helicopters began scanning from above, following the winding path of the river as it cut through the tundra. Searchers looked for anything that could signal life: a canoe, a tent, bright clothing, movement along the shore. But the wilderness was vast and uniform. From the air, everything looked the same: miles of gray-green vegetation and the glint of water under the sun. Weather became another enemy. The same unpredictable skies that had challenged Stefan now hampered rescue teams. Sudden fog rolled in from the bay, grounding helicopters for hours. Rain swept over the muskeg, turning it into a field of mirrored water where footprints disappeared almost instantly. The farther inland the teams went, the more difficult it became to move. For those who took part, the search was emotionally draining. They were looking for a single man in a wilderness large enough to hide entire lakes. Each new day brought hope and disappointment. Some believed he might still be alive, perhaps stranded on a bank or sheltering in the forest. Others, more familiar with the Hayes, feared the worst but continued searching because the land itself demanded it. As days turned into a week, the operation expanded. Drone teams were brought in to scan the river from above. The RCMP coordinated with local rangers and community volunteers. They examined satellite images, comparing them to known sections of the river where current patterns could trap debris. Even with technology, however, nature refused to yield its secrets easily. During that time, Stefan's story spread across social media and news outlets. Photographs of him smiling beside his dogs appeared online. Images of a man full of life, strength, and quiet purpose. People around the world shared his videos and offered words of support to his family. Many were outdoor enthusiasts who understood the thin line between adventure and tragedy. Others were drawn simply by the humanity of it, the idea of someone chasing a dream into the most silent place on Earth. Rescuers continued to focus on the section between the Upper Hayes and the mouth of the Gods River, where several hazards were known to exist. One of the most dangerous was a stretch of white water known locally for its powerful undercurrents. The Hayes was high that summer. The river had swollen with early rains, and the flow was far stronger than normal. It was the kind of water that could overturn a canoe in seconds. By the second week of August, searchers began to find traces. A fragment of green waterproof fabric caught in the branches along the bank. A paddle wedged between rocks. And then, a few miles downstream, what appeared to be part of a small campsite, a torn ground sheet, and the remains of a fire pit. It was difficult to tell how long it had been there, but it gave direction to the search. Hope flickered again. Teams redoubled their efforts along that section, scanning every bend, every inlet, every small island in the river's path. Helicopters circled lower, their noise echoing through the emptiness. But each lead seemed to end in silence. As August wore on, the conditions worsened. Rain and wind returned, and daylight hours grew shorter. The muskeg turned to mud, the rivers to dark, restless water. Equipment broke, people grew tired. Still, they refused to stop. For Stefan's family, thousands of miles away, updates came in brief, factual reports. Search ongoing. Weather poor, no sighting yet. His parents spoke to reporters only once. His father said, he was prepared for everything except being gone. He always came back. Those words stayed with many of the rescuers. They were not searching for a stranger anymore. They were searching for someone who had loved the wilderness as they did, someone who had believed in its beauty despite its danger. The operation continued for nearly 3 weeks before officials made the decision to scale it back. By that time, the area had been scoured by air and water, and every possible route examined. The official statement described the conditions as extremely challenging and the terrain as unforgiving. Still, a smaller group of volunteers refused to stop looking. They continued their search quietly, without media attention, guided by instinct and respect for the land. And in time, their persistence would lead to an answer, one that was as inevitable as it was heartbreaking. But for now, the wilderness remained silent. The river flowed as it always had, carrying its secrets toward Hudson Bay. It was late August when the river finally gave something back. The official search had already been scaled down by then, replaced by smaller, quieter efforts from locals and volunteers who refused to let the story end without resolution. The weather was beginning to shift toward autumn. The nights were longer, the mornings colder, and the tundra had started to turn the color of rust and gold. A group of local volunteers, members of nearby Cree communities who had grown up along the Hayes, decided to take one last trip downriver before conditions became too harsh. They knew the river's moods, the way its current twisted near fallen trees, the way the eddies gathered debris after a storm. If anything of Stefan's was still out there, they believed the river would eventually reveal it. They found him not far from York Factory, near a bend where the Hayes widens before spilling into the vast tidal flats of Hudson Bay. His body was caught against a tangle of driftwood, partially submerged in cold, brown water. Time and distance had carried him nearly 200 miles from where searchers believed he had last camped. The discovery was reported immediately. The RCMP flew in, and within a day, the area was secured. Recovery teams approached with care. This was not just a search anymore. It was an ending. Nearby, they also found fragments of a canoe, torn packs, and traces of supplies scattered along the shore. The two dogs that had accompanied him were nowhere to be seen. For those who had followed his story, the confirmation brought both grief and relief. Weeks of uncertainty gave way to a quiet, heavy sadness. His family was notified in Norway, and arrangements began for his body to be brought home. There were no dramatic statements, no public spectacle, just silence, the kind that follows after the final answer has been spoken. An autopsy was conducted soon after. The findings were clear and simple: death by drowning. There were no signs of injury beyond what the river itself had caused. It was the most likely explanation from the beginning, though it did little to ease the loss. Authorities pieced together what they could from the evidence. His last message on July 25th placed him upstream, where the river was narrower and faster. They believed he had attempted to cross or navigate a difficult stretch where currents converged. The high water levels that summer would have made even experienced paddlers vulnerable. Once overturned, the cold would have done its work quickly, limbs numbing, muscles locking within minutes. The river would have carried him until the current lost its strength near the bay. As for his dogs, theories varied. Some believed they had drowned alongside him. Others hoped they had made it to shore and disappeared into the wilderness, following their instincts as northern dogs do. There were unconfirmed reports, weeks later, of two stray animals seen near a distant fishing camp, but nothing certain was ever proven. In the wilderness, the line between disappearance and legend is thin. When the news reached Norway, tributes poured in. Friends and fellow adventurers described Stefan as a man who lived with purpose, who sought not danger, but understanding. He respected nature, one wrote, and he knew its cost. Another said, he didn't chase death, he chased meaning. And sometimes, those paths cross. In Canada, those who had taken part in the search held a small gathering by the riverbank. They lit a fire, placed a carved paddle into the current, and watched it drift away. For them, the act was both farewell and acknowledgement, a reminder that the land gives and takes as it chooses. In the weeks that followed, authorities reviewed the case, confirmed the identity through DNA, and officially closed the investigation. There was no foul play, no mystery beyond the eternal one that surrounds every wilderness death. A man had faced a river stronger than himself, and the river had claimed him. Yet, even in that stark conclusion, there was a sense of peace. Stefan had reached the place he had dreamed of, the edge of the world, where the land ends and the sea begins. He had spoken often, in his writings, about the strange beauty of risk, about how every moment of life becomes sharper when surrounded by uncertainty. "If I am to die somewhere," he once wrote, "let it be where the sky is wide enough to hold the silence." Now he was part of that silence. In the months that followed, the story of his journey continued to spread online. Fellow adventurers shared his photographs and journal entries. Outdoor forums discussed his route, his preparation, and the lessons his tragedy left behind. Some were quick to judge, saying no amount of experience can justify such isolation. Others saw in him a reflection of something deeper, the restless desire to see what lies beyond comfort, to measure oneself against the wild. The Hayes River had claimed another traveler, as it had done many times before. But it had also preserved the essence of his final days, the solitude, the devotion, the respect. And in the quiet currents near York Factory, where the water turns toward Hudson Bay, it carried his story forward, whispering it into the endless northern wind. When news of Stefan's discovery became public, it spread quietly at first, through small outdoor forums, Norwegian news outlets, and communities of wilderness travelers. There were no sensational headlines, no dramatic speculation. The people who followed his story understood what had happened. The wilderness, for all its beauty, remains indifferent. His parents spoke only once to the media. They thanked the Canadian authorities and the Cree volunteers who had searched for their son long after official teams had withdrawn. They said they were proud of him, that he had lived as he wished, close to the world he loved. Then they asked for privacy, and the world respected that wish. In Norway, friends organized a memorial hike along one of Stefan's favorite mountain trails. Dozens of people gathered with their dogs, walking in silence through the mist, carrying lanterns that flickered in the wind. At the summit, they read from his journals. His words, simple, reflective, full of gratitude, became a kind of farewell letter. The wilderness gives meaning not because it listens, but because it doesn't. In the silence, you hear yourself clearly. You see what matters and what never did. Those who had known him found comfort in those words. They understood that Stefan's life had never been about conquering the wild. He sought to belong to it, even if only for a short time. His death, tragic as it was, felt consistent with the life he had chosen. In the weeks following the recovery, online communities dedicated to outdoor exploration began to discuss his final expedition in detail. They studied his route, his equipment, his planning. Many praised his thoroughness, his maps, his weather logs, his satellite check-ins. Others wondered if he had underestimated the river's unpredictability, or if he had simply been caught in a situation where no amount of experience could help. One thing became clear. His story changed how people thought about solo travel in extreme environments. Forums filled with discussions on safety devices, redundancy in communication, and updated satellite beacons. Wilderness instructors used his journey as a case study in survival courses. His name became a reminder that preparation and humility must go hand in hand. In Canada, the local searchers who had helped find him were invited to share their experiences with provincial authorities. They spoke of the need for better coordination between communities and rescue agencies, of the importance of local knowledge in wilderness searches. One elder said simply, "The land is our memory. It knows where to hide and where to show. We just have to listen long enough." Back in Norway, Stefan's online platforms became a digital archive of his work. His videos and journals, once viewed only by a small audience, began to attract thousands of visitors. People wrote messages beneath his final uploads, words of respect, sorrow, and gratitude. They spoke of how his quiet approach to exploration had inspired them to step outside, to walk farther, to look longer at the world around them. For some, his story was a cautionary tale. For others, it was something like a parable about courage and solitude. A Norwegian magazine published a long feature titled "The Man Who Listened to Silence." The writer described Stefan as a bridge between the old explorers and the modern world. Someone who used technology not to escape hardship, but to document the encounter between human fragility and wild endurance. He did not go to test the land, the article read. He went to test what it means to feel alive. His parents received letters from strangers around the world, hikers, paddlers, photographers, and people who had never set foot outside a city. Some wrote that his videos had helped them through loneliness or fear. Others said his words had reminded them that life, even when fragile, can be full of meaning. Over time, grief softened into memory. His family established a small foundation in his name, dedicated to supporting wilderness safety education and responsible adventure travel. They called it the Skjoldvik Initiative. Its mission was simple: to teach others how to prepare, how to respect nature, and how to survive it. Meanwhile, on the banks of the Hayes River, the place where his body was found became a quiet landmark. A simple wooden marker was placed there by the volunteers who had discovered him. No name, no date, just a carved symbol of a paddle and 2 dogs. They said it was enough. The land would remember who it was for. Every summer, travelers passing along that section of the river leave small offerings, stones, feathers, bits of carved wood, tokens of acknowledgement to the man who came so far to understand the place they now pass through. In that way, Stefan's journey did not end with his death. It continued through the stories others told, the lessons they learned, and the silence that lingered after the telling. For those who followed his story closely, it became impossible to think of the Hayes River without thinking of him. His name became part of its geography, his memory folded into the currents and the wind. And though his voice was gone, the echoes of what he had written remained, a reminder that adventure and peace, danger and beauty, are not opposites, but reflections of the same truth, that the wild does not belong to anyone, but welcomes those who come humbly enough to listen. In the months following Stefan's death, something began to shift, not just among those who had known him personally, but within the wider community of wilderness travelers, explorers, and outdoor educators. His story resonated far beyond Norway and Canada. It crossed borders, languages, and lifestyles, because at its heart it wasn't just about adventure. It was about humanity's fragile relationship with the wild. Outdoor forums started referring to Stefan's final journey simply as the Skjoldvik Trek. It became a kind of reference point for discussions about risk, solitude, and the limits of endurance. Experienced adventurers debated what could have been done differently. Was his route too ambitious? Should he have traveled later or earlier in the season? Was solo travel ever justifiable in such terrain? Yet beneath all the speculation ran a quieter current of admiration for his courage, his discipline, and the purity of his intent. He had not sought fame. He had not been chasing followers or sponsorships. His equipment was modest, his words humble. He represented something rare, a person driven not by performance, but by a need to understand. That authenticity gave his legacy a weight that no tragedy could erase. The Skjoldvik Initiative, the foundation his parents created, began to take shape by the next spring. The Skjoldvik Initiative partnered with outdoor safety organizations in both Norway and Canada, offering workshops on expedition planning, satellite communication, cold water survival, and mental resilience in isolation. The first event was held in Tromsø, attended by over 200 hikers, kayakers, and students of environmental sciences. Photographs of Stefan's journeys lined the walls: quiet lakes, misty forests, his dogs sleeping by a campfire. His words accompanied each image. The wild does not test you, it teaches you. The question is whether you are willing to listen. The event didn't glorify what he had done, it honored the lessons learned from it. Speakers discussed the physiological effects of cold water immersion, the importance of redundancy in navigation tools, and the role of mental health in long expeditions. Every session circled back to a single theme: preparation is respect, a new kind of adventurer. In online spaces, a noticeable shift began to take hold. The culture of extreme solo travel, once marked by competition and conquest, started to embrace something quieter and more reflective. Adventurers began speaking more openly about fear, vulnerability, and the emotional cost of isolation. Stefan's story had made it acceptable to admit that even the strongest are not immune to the unpredictability of nature. Several well-known explorers referenced him in interviews. One Canadian paddler said, "He reminded us that wilderness isn't an opponent. It's a mirror. Whatever you bring into it, courage, pride, peace, or pain, it reflects it all back at you." Outdoor educators began including the Skjoldvik principle in their training materials. It wasn't a formal rule, but a mindset that every journey into the wild should carry an equal measure of humility and skill. York Factory and the river. Meanwhile, in Manitoba, the story continued to echo along the Hayes River. York Factory, once the endpoint of Stefan's dream, saw a subtle increase in visitors, paddlers, writers, and filmmakers seeking to trace his route. Some came to understand what had drawn him there. Others came to pay their respects. The Hudson Bay coastline remained as unforgiving as ever. Sudden tides, cold winds, and long distances between landmarks reminded travelers of the dangers that still lived there. But those who made the journey said they felt his presence in small ways: the silence of dawn, the ripple of a current, the faint prints of wolves or dogs near the water's edge. Local Cree guides began sharing his story with new paddlers, not as a cautionary tale, but as a lesson in reverence. "He came here with open eyes," one elder said. "He didn't fight the land. He became part of it. That's why the river finally brought him home." Digital immortality. As the years passed, Stefan's online archive grew into something like a digital shrine. His old YouTube channel, once modest and quiet, became a gathering place. People left comments not just about his final journey, but about the peace they found in his earlier videos, his calm voice, the soft sound of paddles on still water, the way he filmed the smallest details. Frost on a branch, steam from a mug, snow falling on his tent. For many viewers, these moments became meditative, a refuge from the noise of modern life. His content wasn't about adrenaline or triumph, but presence. Long after his death, that message continued to spread, influencing a new generation of content creators who sought authenticity over spectacle. Influence on policy and practice. By 2024, several national parks in Canada had adopted new communication protocols inspired, in part, by lessons learned from his disappearance. Solo adventurers were encouraged to carry dual communication devices, log travel itineraries in centralized databases, and receive safety briefings from local communities before departure. It was a small change, perhaps, but a meaningful one. For those who dedicate their lives to exploring remote terrain, Stefan's story became a quiet reminder that experience doesn't grant immunity, only respect. The echo. In time, his name began to fade from headlines but grew stronger in memory. His family, still living in Norway, said they often received photographs from people around the world. Hikers holding one of his quotes on scraps of paper, paddlers carving his initials into wooden paddles, artists painting the northern rivers he once dreamed of. Every tribute seemed to carry the same feeling, that he had, in some way, connected people to the deeper essence of adventure. Not the glory, not the risk, but the stillness, the ancient pull of the land itself. And somewhere far to the west, in the endless tundra between Fort Severn and York Factory, the river still moves with the same cold strength. It carries silt, stories, and the memory of those who dared to follow its path. Among them, the story of one man endures, a quiet Norwegian who went to listen to the silence, and who, in losing himself to it, reminded the world how fragile and sacred that silence truly is. The Hayes River, when traced on a map, appears deceptively calm, a silver thread weaving through the dense green fabric of northern Canada. Yet those who know it understand that this line is not still. It breathes, twists, and changes with the seasons. In the spring it is swollen and violent, and even in summer, it carries the cold pulse of northern ice. It was on this river that Stefan's journey reached its vanishing point. By the time investigators and experts retraced his likely path, much of the evidence had already been washed away. The river keeps its secrets well, but they pieced together enough from the GPS data, fragments of gear, and journal entries sent in earlier days to form a rough picture of what might have happened. Stefan had been following a known portage trail leading toward the main body of the Hayes. His progress, by all indications, was steady. His last confirmed coordinates showed him close to the place where two tributaries merged into a single, powerful current, a section locals call the crossing. Those who had paddled there before knew it was one of the trickiest points on the route, even for seasoned travelers. It was here, experts believed, that something went wrong. The current during that season was unusually swift. A late melt had caused the water levels to surge higher than usual. Stefan, determined to stay on schedule, might have decided to cross rather than wait out the flood. He was cautious, but he was also deeply committed to his plan. For someone who had spent years trusting his own discipline and experience, it would have seemed manageable. No one knows the exact moment when control was lost. Perhaps the canoe struck a hidden log. Perhaps a sudden gust of wind spun it sideways. Or perhaps the dogs, sensing the instability, shifted weight at the wrong time. In those seconds, balance would have vanished, and with it, everything else. Cold water kills quickly. Even a strong swimmer has only minutes before muscle function fades. The haze, fed by countless icy tributaries, offers little mercy. The canoe fragments found downstream told a silent story of impact and drag, of how the river had seized the craft and pulled it under. Somewhere along that descent, Stefan's dogs may have made it to shore, or not. The wilderness remains mute on that point. Searchers later found faint paw prints near a sandbank miles away, but they could have belonged to wolves. Or perhaps, as some of the Cree volunteers like to say, the dogs ran ahead to guide him home. What struck those who studied his disappearance most was not the drama of it, but the quietness. There was no distress call, no sign of panic. His last satellite message, sent a few hours earlier, had been calm, clear weather, spirits high, continuing west. The same words he had used countless times before. In that small fragment of communication lies both tragedy and beauty. To the end, Stefan remained himself, methodical, optimistic, and at peace with the challenge. The more experts studied the route, the clearer it became that nothing could have truly prevented what happened. The margin between safety and disaster in such terrain is razor thin. A single misjudgment, a shift in weather, or a submerged branch is enough. Even the most experienced can fall victim to the randomness of nature. For weeks after, when search teams patrolled the riverbanks, they often spoke about how deceptive the wilderness could be. It looks eternal, solid, unmoving. Yet under the surface, everything is in motion: currents, winds, temperature, chance. One of the pilots involved in the search later said, "When you fly over that land, you understand how small you are. It's a world that doesn't even notice us. We think we're in control, but up there, it's just the land, the water, and time." In that sense, the Hayes River became more than just the place where Stefan vanished. It became a symbol, the line between man and nature, between what can be prepared for and what cannot. And even now, years later, paddlers who make that crossing stop to look at the water differently. They remember the Norwegian traveler who disappeared into its depths and whose story spread far beyond the wilderness that claimed him. They study the currents, read the eddies, and listen to the sound of the river, wondering what it whispered that day. For Stefan, it had been the culmination of everything he believed in. He had written once that he wanted to find the places where silence becomes a language. The river gave him that, though not in the way he intended. In the end, he became what he sought, part of the story the wilderness tells in its own quiet voice. The Hayes River has always commanded respect. Long before Stefan's journey, it was a lifeline for indigenous communities and fur traders, yet it was also a quiet graveyard. Hudson's Bay Company records, oral histories, and explorers' journals all tell similar stories. Travelers lost to the currents, canoes overturned, entire expeditions delayed or abandoned because the river refused to yield. Its name in Cree, Kizikaw, refers not only to water but to the path of movement, a reminder that the river flows on, indifferent to human presence. Stefan's disappearance was tragic, but in the broader context, it was part of a pattern centuries in the making. Canoes had capsized here, and people had drowned trying to cross swollen channels. Even experienced paddlers, armed with modern equipment, were vulnerable. The river had a rhythm no training could fully tame, a combination of speed, hidden logs, shifting sandbanks, and sudden weather that could turn calm waters into dangerous torrents. Local guides often recalled stories handed down from elders: a winter trapping party lost in the ice fields, a Hudson's Bay Company trader swept downstream, a pair of young brothers who vanished while fishing. In every account, the river remained the same: powerful, beautiful, and indifferent. Those who respected it survived. Those who underestimated it, even for a moment, often did not. When rescue teams reconstructed Stefan's final path, they realized he had entered a particularly unforgiving stretch. The river there narrows briefly, then explodes into a series of small rapids and whirlpools, perfect traps for a canoe caught slightly off balance. The early summer rains had raised the water levels even higher than usual, and the current was faster than any of the volunteers had experienced in decades. In this way, the river had combined natural factors in a lethal alignment. The tragedy highlighted a difficult truth about wilderness travel. Preparation is crucial, but it can only reduce risk, not eliminate it. Stefan had trained, planned, and equipped himself meticulously. He had survived harsher conditions in Norway and documented everything with careful precision. And yet, the river's force proved greater than even the best-laid plans. The Hayes River's toll extends beyond individual lives. Communities along its banks have developed knowledge and rituals to respect its unpredictability. Paddlers are taught to read subtle changes in watercolor, to notice the slightest shifts in wind direction, to respect the pace and power of the current. Stories of past accidents are shared, not to frighten, but to educate. They are a reminder that in the wilderness, humility is as important as courage. For Stefan's story, this context offered both understanding and solace. His death was not reckless. It was an encounter with a natural force that has claimed countless others. By studying his journey and its outcome, the outdoor community learned lessons that could save lives. Courses on cold water survival, river navigation, and solo travel safety began citing his expedition as a case study. Beyond practical lessons, the river's toll also underscores the emotional resonance of wilderness exploration. People who risk themselves in remote places understand the paradox. The same land that nurtures, inspires, and awes can just as easily demand its due. Stefan had embraced that paradox completely. He had known, intellectually and emotionally, the power of the water he sought to traverse. And in doing so, he had joined the lineage of explorers, guides, and indigenous travelers whose lives have been intertwined with the Hayes for generations. In the quiet that follows his story, the river continues its ancient flow. Currents twist around logs, eddies gather leaves and debris, and the water moves steadily toward Hudson Bay. For those who follow, it serves as a reminder. The wilderness is not merely scenery. It is an active force, patient and impartial. And every story it claims, like Stefan's, becomes part of its enduring memory. Stefan Skjodelvik's disappearance was more than an individual tragedy. It was a reminder of the power, history, and mystery of the Hayes River. Every year, travelers who attempt the same path carry his story with them, aware that the river, like all wild places, respects no one fully, but teaches everything to those willing to listen. Stefan Skjodelvik's journey was a masterclass in preparation, courage, and respect for the wilderness, but it was also a stark reminder of the unpredictability inherent in extreme environments. His story has since become a reference point for adventurers, educators, and anyone drawn to remote, untamed landscapes. What it teaches is both practical and philosophical. Survival is never guaranteed, no matter the skill, and every choice carries weight. Preparation was Stefan's strength. He spent months studying maps, tracking weather patterns, calculating food rations, and testing his equipment. Every item in his pack had a purpose. Every route had been scouted virtually and cross-checked with historical records. His dogs, trained for long expeditions, were an additional layer of safety and companionship. By all accounts, he had minimized the factors within his control. Yet the wilderness does not operate solely on human logic. Rivers rise and fall, winds shift without warning, and the smallest obstacle, a hidden log, a sudden current, can change everything in seconds. The Hayes River, steeped in centuries of history and danger, demonstrated this truth with quiet finality. Even the most meticulous planning could not account for the river's exact temperament on July 25th. Stefan's death also illustrates the paradox of risk. The very qualities that make an adventurer competent, discipline, determination, confidence, can sometimes lead to tragedy. Trusting in skill is essential, but it cannot negate the need for humility. His last message, calm and measured, shows that even someone fully aware of the hazards can be caught in a moment of miscalculation or fate. For the outdoor community, his story has prompted a reevaluation of solo expeditions. Safety protocols now emphasize redundancy, multiple communication devices, GPS tracking, and detailed check-in schedules. Courses on river navigation stress understanding currents, reading watercolor, and recognizing hazards invisible from the shore. Cold water immersion training has become standard for anyone attempting long canoe trips in northern regions. Stefan's meticulous documentation of his journey provides a blueprint for these lessons, illustrating both how to prepare and how unpredictable conditions can override even the best-laid plans. But beyond the practical, his journey inspires reflection on the human relationship with wilderness. The desire to explore, to push boundaries, and to seek solitude in untamed landscapes is a timeless impulse. It is part of what connects humans to the natural world. Stefan's approach combined ambition with reverence. He did not seek to conquer or dominate. He sought understanding, presence, and immersion. His journals and videos reveal someone attuned to the rhythm of nature, patient in observation, and humble in his place within it. The balance between courage and caution is delicate. Many travelers are drawn to challenge because it tests limits and sharpens perception. Stefan's story teaches that such challenges must be approached with respect, forethought, and contingency planning. Adventure is not only a test of endurance, but a dialogue with the environment, a negotiation in which the land, rivers, and weather are silent partners with their own terms. Finally, his journey underscores the emotional dimensions of risk. Isolation, even in preparation, carries psychological weight. The calm demeanor he displayed in his final messages may have masked the exhaustion, tension, or subtle anxiety of daily survival. Modern wilderness education emphasizes not just the physical, but the mental demands of remote travel, the ability to stay focused, make rational decisions under stress, and remain adaptable when conditions change. Stefan's disappearance is a cautionary tale, but it is also a story of intentional living, of fully committing to one's passion while acknowledging nature's supremacy. His life and death demonstrate that adventure is meaningful not because it is safe, but because it is approached with honesty, preparation, and respect for forces beyond human control. For those who follow in his footsteps, the lesson is clear. Meticulous preparation can save lives, humility is essential, and every expedition is a conversation with the wild, not a victory over it. Stefan's journey reminds us that the true measure of an adventurer is not only what they achieve, but how they engage with the untamed world and how they honor the lessons it imparts. The search for Stefan Skjodelvik was unlike any other in recent memory. Remote, vast, and unforgiving, the northern Canadian wilderness tested every skill, tool, and instinct of the people who joined the effort. While the media often reduced the story to statistics, days missing, miles scoured, helicopters flown, the real narrative unfolded through the personal accounts of those on the ground. First Nations volunteers, whose knowledge of the land spanned generations, were central to the operation. They understood the river's moods in ways no map could convey. One Cree guide recalled early in the search, "The river speaks in currents and bends. You don't see danger, you feel it." That's how we knew something had happened near the first rapids. You could see where the water changed, where it might take a man and his canoe without warning. These volunteers patrolled by boat, skimming the edges of the river, scanning the shores for any trace. Every fallen tree, sandbank, or floating debris was carefully examined. Some carried cameras or GPS devices, but much of their work relied on intuition honed over decades. One volunteer described standing on a bank at dusk, listening to the water. It's quiet, almost too quiet. You hear the wind in the trees, the water moving, but nothing else. Then you start imagining what it would look like if someone were out there, struggling. It's haunting, and it keeps you moving, because you can't stop searching until you know. RCMP officers and search and rescue pilots contributed a different perspective. Flying over the endless expanse of lakes and muskeg, they spoke of the surreal scale of the landscape. One helicopter pilot recalled, "You can see a canoe from the air if you're lucky, but most of the time, the river is just a silver line stretching into nothing. It's humbling. You realize how small a human is against this land. That's when you understand the urgency. They're out there, and time is limited." Searchers also documented the emotional toll. Days turned into nights filled with uncertainty. Even when the sun was high, every bend of the river felt like a test. Supplies ran low, fatigue set in, and the mind wandered to the missing traveler. Volunteers described long moments of silence, sitting on the riverbank, staring into the water, reflecting on their own vulnerability and mortality. Some accounts recall encountering signs that hinted at Stefan's passage, small bits of waterproof fabric snagged in branches, tiny footprints in soft mud, and broken paddles partially submerged in eddies. Each discovery was fleeting, and none guaranteed closure, but it renewed determination. One volunteer noted, "When you see something like that, you feel his presence, not as a ghost, but as someone who passed this way and left a mark. You want to follow, to finish what he started." The dogs he had traveled with were never found, though volunteers left food and blankets at riverbanks in hopes that they might have survived. Stories persist in local communities of brief sightings, a shadow in the trees, two shapes moving along a sandbar, but none were confirmed. Whether they made it to safety or succumbed alongside him remains a mystery that the wilderness keeps. Ultimately, the searchers faced the realization that the river itself was the final arbiter. Weeks of searching narrowed to a smaller area near York Factory, where driftwood and debris indicated the current's path. It was there that his body was eventually discovered. For those who had participated in the hunt, the discovery brought a complex mix of relief and sorrow. One volunteer wrote afterward, "Finding him didn't feel like closure. It felt like the river had spoken, finally. There was peace in that moment, even though it hurt. We were part of his journey now, in a way we never expected." The search left a lasting impact on the volunteers. Many spoke of a deeper connection to the land and water, a respect for forces beyond human control, and a renewed appreciation for life. Stefan's disappearance became more than a tragedy. It became a lesson in endurance, community effort, and the invisible bonds shared by all who venture into the wild. For those who joined the search, the story of Stefan Skjodovic was never just about the man. It was about the river, the wilderness, and the humility required to navigate both. The searchers returned home changed, carrying memories of silence, beauty, danger, and the profound responsibility of witnessing a life intertwined with nature at its rawest. Stefan's two loyal companions, Luna and Togo, were inseparable from him throughout the journey. They were more than pets. They were trained expedition partners, alert to danger, capable of navigating uneven terrain, and companions in the long stretches of silence that defined the trek. Their fate, however, remains one of the most haunting mysteries of the Hayes River. Search teams never recovered the dogs. Small traces, faint paw prints along the banks, a few scattered tufts of fur, offered fleeting hope, but nothing definitive. Some local guides speculated that, if the dogs had survived the river crossing, they may have made it to higher ground and wandered away, driven by instinct or fear. Others feared that, like their owner, they had been claimed by the river's cold, swift waters. Witnesses from the Cree communities who scouted the area months later spoke of seeing two silhouettes moving along a distant sandbar at dawn. The shapes disappeared before they could be approached. In these accounts, the dogs became almost mythic, symbols of loyalty and endurance, surviving where humans could not. Whether they lived or died, they had shared every step with Stefan until the very end. Reconstructing Stefan's final hours relies largely on his meticulous records, the fragments of his equipment found downstream, and the behavior of the river itself. On the morning of July 25th, he had written in his journal, "Clear weather. Spirits high. Continuing west." This entry is the last confirmed message. Investigators believe that Stefan reached a particularly treacherous stretch of the Hayes River, a confluence of strong currents and submerged obstacles, compounded by higher-than-average water levels from early summer rains. Canoeists familiar with the area describe the crossing as deceptively calm until a sudden misstep can spin a canoe sideways, instantly placing a traveler in freezing, turbulent water. It is likely that Stefan attempted the crossing with his dogs in the canoe. Accounts suggest he would have tried to stabilize the vessel against the current, perhaps steering toward a sandbank or shallow area. The river, however, is indifferent. A submerged log or a sudden whirlpool may have capsized the canoe in an instant. Given the water temperature, close to freezing, the body loses muscle function within minutes. Even a strong swimmer can only survive briefly in these conditions. If Luna and Togo remained in the canoe or attempted to escape, the odds of survival were similarly slim. Experts reconstructed the current's likely path, showing that the river carried Stefan's canoe over many miles of turbulent water before it finally wedged against driftwood near the York factory area. This distance explains why the recovery site was far from his last known coordinates. The drift, combined with his careful packing of supplies, suggests he fought to maintain control until the final moments. In these last hours, the wilderness acted without malice but without mercy. There is no record of fear or panic, only a quiet struggle against forces larger than any human could confront alone. Stefan's journal, his disciplined travel logs, and his calm final messages all point to someone fully engaged with the challenge, even as it became overwhelming. For those who study the incident, the dog's absence and the river's speed add layers of poignancy. Luna and Togo had shared months of training and hardship with him, embodying loyalty in its purest form. That their ultimate fate remains unknown makes the story more haunting, yet it also immortalizes them as symbols of companionship, resilience, and the human-animal bond in extreme wilderness exploration. In the end, the Hayes River claimed Stefan, and likely his companions, not out of cruelty, but as it has for countless travelers throughout history. What remains is a story of trust, courage, and the unflinching reality of life in the wild. His last hours, reconstructed through fragments, currents, and intuition, serve as a stark reminder. In the northern wilderness, every moment is precarious, and every decision carries weight beyond what the eye can see. Stefan Skjotelvik's journey into the Canadian wilderness offers a complex tapestry of lessons, practical, emotional, and philosophical. While his story is deeply tragic, it has become a guidepost for adventurers, educators, and anyone seeking to understand the delicate balance between human ambition and nature's immutable force. Practical lessons. First and foremost, his expedition reinforced the importance of meticulous preparation. Every detail mattered: navigation plans, satellite communication, food rations, and emergency protocols. Stefan's careful planning allowed search teams to reconstruct his path, providing invaluable insights into wilderness travel. Yet, even the most thorough preparation cannot guarantee survival. The Hayes River, with its unpredictable currents, submerged logs, and sudden weather changes, underscored the limits of human control. Solo travelers now take note of his experience, emphasizing redundancy, multiple communication devices, detailed itinerary filings with authorities, and emergency signaling equipment. Training in cold water immersion and river navigation has become essential for anyone attempting extended northern expeditions. Emotional and psychological lessons. Stefan's journey highlights the mental challenges of isolation. Long days of paddling and hiking, combined with the responsibility of caring for two dogs, required constant vigilance and focus. His calm final messages reveal a person managing stress, maintaining optimism, and staying disciplined. Yet his disappearance reminds us that even the most resilient individuals can encounter insurmountable obstacles. Mental preparedness is as critical as physical readiness. Educators now stress that solo expeditions should include not only survival skills, but also mental resilience, decision-making under pressure, and an awareness of psychological limits. Stefan's story teaches that recognizing one's vulnerabilities is a strength, not a weakness. Philosophical reflections. Beyond the practical, Stefan's journey invites reflection on humanity's relationship with the wilderness. He sought not conquest, but communion, a deep engagement with landscapes untouched by roads or industry. In his journals, he wrote about listening to the silence, observing patterns in water and wind, and understanding his place in the world. His death, while tragic, is inseparable from the life he chose to lead. It illustrates the paradox of adventure. The very act of pursuing meaning and presence in the wild carries inherent risk. For Stefan, the wilderness was not a backdrop for triumph. It was a teacher, an impartial arbiter, and a mirror reflecting human fragility. Legacy for the outdoor community. The impact of his story is ongoing. Courses in wilderness safety now reference his trek as a case study. Outdoor communities honor him through memorials, online archives, and discussions on responsible adventure. His foundation, the Skjadalvik Initiative, continues to teach preparation, respect, and ethical exploration. For those who venture into extreme landscapes, his journey is a reminder that courage must be tempered by humility. The wilderness demands respect, vigilance, and adaptability. Stefan's life demonstrates that true adventure is not defined by conquest or survival alone, but by engagement, presence, and understanding of forces larger than oneself. A reflection on mortality and meaning. Finally, Stefan's story is a meditation on mortality. He knowingly accepted the risks inherent in the northern wilderness, pursuing a path few dare to tread. While the outcome was fatal, the purpose of his journey, connection, documentation, and understanding, remains inspiring. Every year, paddlers and hikers retracing parts of his route carry his memory with them. His words, journals, and videos continue to influence those seeking meaning in solitude, those who wish to challenge themselves while honoring the natural world. Stefan Skjadalvik did not conquer the wilderness, he embraced it. His journey, and its ultimate cost, leave a legacy that is both cautionary and illuminating, reminding us that adventure is inseparable from risk, and that true respect for the wild requires both preparation and humility. Stefan Skjadalvik's story does not end with the final currents of the Hayes River. While the northern wilderness claimed him, the ripples of his journey continue to be felt far beyond its remote banks. His life, work, and tragic end have become a testament to the power, beauty, and danger of the wild, a narrative that teaches, inspires, and memorializes the human desire to explore, honoring a life. In Norway, friends, family, and fellow adventurers have established multiple ways to remember him. Small memorial hikes are held each year, often along routes he loved or inspired. Photographs, journals, and equipment are displayed in local museums and community centers, keeping his story alive for new generations. His parents, through the Skjadalvik Initiative, continue to promote wilderness safety and responsible exploration, ensuring that his legacy is both personal and educational. Across Canada, the Hayes River now bears the quiet imprint of his passage. Paddlers and hikers who traverse the northern landscapes pause at key points along the river to honor him, leaving small stones, carved paddles, or simple inscriptions. These gestures, modest yet profound, acknowledge a life lived fully in pursuit of passion, courage, and connection with the land. The river's enduring lesson. The Hayes River itself remains a silent teacher. It has claimed countless travelers throughout history, from indigenous communities to European explorers, fur traders, and modern adventurers. Stefan's story is one among many, yet it resonates in a modern context, a reminder of the thin line between exploration and tragedy, between mastery and humility. The river does not discriminate, but it rewards those who respect its rhythms and understand its power. In the wake of his disappearance and recovery, his experience has informed policy, education, and public consciousness. Wilderness travelers now approach northern Canadian rivers with renewed caution, armed with training in river navigation, survival, and communication. Stefan's meticulous documentation has become a case study, a model of both preparedness and the unpredictable consequences that nature can impose. The emotional and philosophical legacy. Stefan's story endures because it resonates beyond mere safety lessons. It speaks to the human desire to confront solitude, to test one's limits, and to engage deeply with the natural world. His life and death reflect a balance of ambition and humility, courage and respect. The same wilderness that challenged him inspired countless others to pursue their own paths, informed by his experience and mindful of its lessons. For those who knew him personally, and for the communities that followed his journey, Stefan's memory is both sorrowful and uplifting. He reminds us that adventure carries inherent risk, but that the pursuit of understanding and connection is a noble endeavor. His story encourages a reverence for nature, a thoughtful approach to exploration, and an appreciation for the fleeting, precious moments of life. A lasting tribute. At York Factory, where the river meets Hudson Bay and where Stefan's final journey concluded, a small wooden paddle marks the site. It bears no name, no date, only a symbol of two loyal dogs beside a canoe. This humble memorial captures the essence of his life: simplicity, courage, companionship, and respect for the wild. Travelers who pause here carry forward the memory of a man who listened to the wilderness, documented its beauty, and accepted its dangers with grace. Stefan Skjotelvik's life, journey, and legacy remind us that the wilderness is not just a backdrop for human achievement. It is a living, breathing entity. It teaches humility, endurance, and awe. It rewards curiosity and punishes recklessness. And it preserves the stories of those who dare to enter its embrace, ensuring that even in silence, voices like Stefan's continue to inspire, educate, and resonate across generations. In the end, the man who sought the language of silence became part of it. His legacy flows onward, like the Hayes River itself, uncharted, powerful, and eternal.